It takes the plane an extra 15 seconds and 600 meters more runway than usual to lift off. Finally, it climbs into the air. But almost immediately, it goes into a stall.
Stall it! Stall it! We're falling!
The warning kicks in.
Pull up! Pull up!
But there's nothing the pilots can do.
Larry, we're going down! Larry! I know it! I know it!
Piecing the evidence together, investigators can now establish how a combination of human error and extreme weather caused Flight 90 to crash. First, as snow builds up on the taxiway, Wheaton uses reverse thrust to help push back from the gate.
Engine anti-ice.
Second, with the engine anti-ice turned off, freezing snow and ice are drawn into the engine. This interferes with the engine's performance. As a result, when Flight 90 takes off, the engines are only producing a thrust or engine pressure ratio of 1.70. A Boeing 737 needs a thrust ratio of at least 2.04 to take off safely. The final investigation finds the pilot, Larry Wheaton, guilty of a catalogue of errors. The accident drives home the fact that when the weather gets bad, there is no margin for error. It's a problem engineers have been battling with for years. The modern fight against extreme weather goes back to the 1970s. Christmas Eve, 1971. Lancer Flight 508 is bound for the remote Peruvian town of Pachalpa. On board are 17-year-old Juliana Kopka and her mother, Maria. Her father runs a wildlife research station in the jungle, and the family plan to spend the Christmas holidays together.
I was very excited and looking forward to seeing my father. I hadn't seen him for a long time. The research station was also like a second home to me, and I was really thrilled to be spending a couple of months there.
It's a busy flight. Many other people are joining family and friends for the holidays. The first 30 minutes of the journey are uneventful. But then, the plane runs into a tropical thunderstorm.
Thunderbolts were flashing around us, and the plane was being thrown up and down. People were very nervous, even terrified.
Then suddenly, the plane is hit by a huge bolt of lightning. Everything is thrown around.
It goes through my mind like a film. Everything went very fast.
The pilots fight to keep control. But the plane is breaking up.
Suddenly, it turned very quiet. I could only hear the sound of the wind in my ears.
Juliana falls more than 3 kilometers. Yet miraculously, she survives, still strapped into her seat. The seat may have been her salvation.
I ought to have injured myself very badly when I hit the treetops. But the airline seat was below me, and I can only imagine it cushioned the landing.
Juliana is alive, but she has a broken collarbone, a badly swollen right eye, large gashes on her arms and legs, and concussion. Her first thought is for her mother, but she's nowhere to be seen. Juliana is on her own. But she has one vital piece of knowledge.
My father used to tell me, when you get lost, you should try and find a stream or running water. He said, follow that stream and you will find a bigger stream, and that will turn into a river. And then you'll find people living nearby.
As news of the accident reaches the outside world, rescue planes are sent to search for survivors.
I could hear the planes searching above me. I knew the rescue operation had started. But I wasn't able to do anything as the jungle was dense and I couldn't communicate with them.
As she sets off to look for help, her only food is a handful of sweets she's found at the crash site.
I lived on them for 3 days and just drank water. There were piranhas in the river. Stingrays were an even greater danger, and electric eels. I could see caimans everywhere.
As the days and nights go by, she becomes increasingly exhausted and disorientated.
With each day, I lost more hope. I had moments when I was desperate, especially during the nights. The nights were horrible.
Deep cuts on her arm begin to worry her.
I felt there is something in my arm. It kind of hurt. Something was moving in there. I couldn't see it properly, but when I twisted my arm, I saw that little white heads were looking out.
The wound has become infested with flesh-eating maggots. Finally, after 11 days, famished and exhausted, she stumbles on a logging camp. It's her salvation. Today, 40 years later, Juliana Kopke is Dr. Juliana Diller and works as a librarian at the Munich Zoological Center in Germany. She's the only survivor of Lancer Flight 508. Her mother, along with 90 other passengers and the crew, have died. Memories of the accident are always with her.
Mostly, it's an atmosphere, a sound, a smell, sometimes even a color. And I'm taken back to the situation then. It's very strange, but I think this is how it will always be.
When aircraft investigators later examine the accident, they find a chain of events leading up to the disaster. 40 minutes into the journey, Lancer Flight 508 runs into a thunderstorm. Lightning hits the aircraft's right wing. Vapor from a fuel tank ignites. Fire spreads, and the wing is torn from the fuselage. The Lockheed Electra falls out of the sky. It's one of several accidents during the 1970s and 80s that are attributed to lightning and marks the beginning of an attempt to find solutions to the hazards of lightning strikes. One of the centers of research into the dangers of flying is NASA. At its research center in Langley, Virginia, it drop tests helicopters, crashes passenger cabins, and develops new forms of cockpit instrumentation, all in the name of improving aircraft design. But during the 1980s, one of the most important topics of research is lightning. The work is particularly urgent because from the 1980s onwards, increasing numbers of aircraft are built using carbon fiber components in the fuselage. It's lighter, but more easily damaged by lightning than a conventional metal fuselage. Modern planes also depend on sophisticated electrical instruments that are damaged by the electromagnetic field of a lightning storm. Bruce Fisher is director and chief engineer at NASA Langley. In the 1980s, he was a flight engineer in the Storm Hazard Research Team.
NASA's Storm Hazards Research, getting struck by lightning now to enhance.
He was part of a team that flew a specially adapted F-106 military aircraft into hundreds of lightning storms.
You'd see lightning flashes around. The spectacular ones are the ones that hit the nose boom. Because you'd see this big arc of lightning, and you'd watch that baby come right down the side of the aircraft, right by the canopy where you're sitting.
Fisher's research provides important insights into combating the hazards of lightning.
We had to try and gather in-flight lightning data. We discovered that almost every single lightning strike to an aircraft in flight is triggered by the aircraft itself. The presence of the aircraft causes a lightning strike to be there that would not otherwise have occurred.
They also find that a lightning strike can discharge an electric current of up to 200,000 amps in a single second. 1 amp is sufficient to kill. This huge current can attack an aircraft's fuselage, burning a hole through it. By the late 1980s, NASA can advise aircraft manufacturers how to make aircraft lightning-proof. Fiberglass components are reinforced to withstand lightning strikes. Aircraft fuel is made less explosive. Electrical equipment is carefully shielded. Today, lightning is rarely a problem. But events will show there's another side to storms that can be equally hazardous. High winds. Toronto, Canada. It's a summer evening and Air France Flight 358 from Paris is approaching Toronto International Airport. But as the flight begins its descent, the weather deteriorates dramatically.
Toronto, Air France 358 approaching.
Unusually severe winds and heavy rain hammer the aircraft. Lightning flashes across the sky. Philippe Lacaille is returning from holiday with his family.
The pilot said, "Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some weather above Toronto. We're going to have to circle for a little while." So we just reopened our books and circled.
Visibility is poor. The pilots struggle to see where they're going. plane is rocked from side to side. Finally, the aircraft touches down. There's a spontaneous outbreak of applause. But the ordeal is not over. Moments later, still traveling at nearly 200 kilometers an hour, the plane runs off the runway. The plane plows through the airport perimeter fence. And finally comes to rest in a small ravine.
And everybody was like stunned, in shock, you know, first of all to be alive, because how can you survive this kind of event, you know, it's just miraculous. But also, what are we doing next now? What's going on?
Almost immediately, there are shouts of fire. When fire breaks out, there are only about 90 seconds to evacuate an aircraft before fire reaches the fuel tanks.
It was like a vision of hell.
It's everybody for themselves.
The smell of burning fuel.
As the last passengers scramble to exit, Flight 358 bursts into flames. There are dozens of injuries, but all 302 passengers and crew survive. Six years later, Philippe Lacaille is still living with the emotional scars.
You never forget this kind of emotional upheaval. It was very hard. Short of a miracle, I can't explain how we could have escaped in 1 minute and 15 seconds through 2 gates, 2 doors, 309 passengers.
The episode is dubbed the Toronto Miracle. As air crash investigators now arrive at the scene, they face one basic question. Why did a plane equipped with the most modern navigation aids shoot off the runway? Was it a question of pilot error, mechanical failure, or extreme weather, or even a combination of them all? They take data from the aircraft's charred and scorched black boxes. Réal Lavasseur is the chief crash investigator.
So we looked at the brakes, we looked at the tires, we looked at the engines, we looked at all the systems, the hydraulics and all the other systems, electrical, whatnot, and there was absolutely nothing wrong with that aircraft.
But when they analyze Flight 358's last moments, they uncover what appear to be a number of pilot errors. The crew had brought the aircraft into land far too fast and had hit the runway far too far along.
I don't think they had a clear realization at that point as to how much runway they were leaving behind before they landed the aircraft. And consequently, the aircraft lands quite long, about halfway down the runway.
As the end of the runway appears, the plane is still going too quickly.
It was still doing over 120 miles an hour, so that's a lot of speed.
But is it simply a matter of pilot error? As investigators look further, they find a more complicated story. The pilots may have also been victims of exceptional weather. They may have run into a dangerous phenomenon known as wind shear. Wind shear is a serious threat to aircraft. It occurs in the 2 or 3 minutes before a storm breaks, when there can be rapid shifts in wind direction.
You can see a thunderstorm approaching. Big cloud, getting dark, and what happens to the wind? It goes calm, and then all of a sudden, it starts whipping around, and then it comes at you from all directions.
This alarming phenomenon is caused by a cold front hitting warmer air. In their worst form, these winds are like mini tornadoes in reverse. Highly concentrated coils of wind that instead of spiraling upwards, spiral downwards. They are known as microbursts or downdrafts. They're considered so potentially lethal that during the 1990s, NASA spends millions of pounds investigating them. Paul Robinson worked on the NASA wind shear program.
Microbursts form underneath large thunderstorm cells that can extend up to 50, 60,000 feet. Aircraft flying through that will experience very strong horizontal wind variations.
NASA scientists discover how microbursts can cause a pilot to make errors. A column of cold air sweeps down from the cloud base, accelerating as it goes. As it hits the ground, it spreads out horizontally. Then it curls upwards like a series of waves. An aircraft flying near this will experience a wind that starts as a headwind and then turns round and becomes a powerful tailwind.
When aircraft are slow and low and trying to control their speed as well as they can, the combination of the two in a microburst can be very hazardous.
Wind shear, or microbursts, are believed to be responsible for a number of disasters. 1982, Pan Am Flight 759 crashes in New Orleans. 153 people are killed. Likely cause, microburst. 1985, Delta Airlines Flight 191 crashes at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. 134 people die. Cause, microburst. More recent accidents linked to severe wind shear include a US air flight that crashed in 1994 and a Goodyear airship that crashed in 2005. So is it possible Air France Flight 358 is also a victim of some form of wind shear? Experts differ on the details, but they've pieced together what probably happened. As the aircraft comes into land, it runs into powerful headwinds. Visibility is appalling, and the pilots battle to see the runway. Then the wind whips round to a tailwind, and the plane picks up speed. As a result, it's carried too far along the runway and lands much too fast. The pilots have been caught out by the rapidly shifting winds typical of wind shear.
The investigation concluded that this crew landed an aircraft in very much reduced visibility in conditions where a crosswind was beyond the limits of the aircraft.
Extreme weather has claimed another victim. Spring 2010, and a high-powered delegation of Polish dignitaries takes off for Russia. It includes Lech Kaczynski, Poland's hugely popular president. They're on their way to remember a massacre near the Russian village of Katyn that has caused hostility between Poland and Russia since the Second World War. The hope is that this important commemoration may finally bring reconciliation. But as the Polish aircraft nears the Russian city of Smolensk, it's enveloped in fog. Landing is going to be difficult.
Good morning, Smolensk. This is Polish military 101, estimating in 5 minutes.
Tomasz Hipki is a member of the Polish National Aviation Council and a journalist.
There were places where fog was touching the ground. In other places, cloud base was way below 100 meters, and the visibility on runway was just 200 meters. So, weather conditions were much too bad for landing.
Air traffic control counsels against even attempting to land. Worse still, the airport is not equipped with low visibility lighting to guide planes in.
Smolensk North Airport is a former military airbase with very inadequate infrastructure.
But the pilot continues to attempt to land. He makes one, then a second attempt to bring the aircraft down. Each time he's forced to pull up. Finally, he makes a third attempt. The plane comes in low. The pilots can't see the runway, but continue on down.
Too low, terrain.
In their zeal to see the runway lights through the mist, they went straight through their decision height, below which, if you don't have sight of the runway lights, you should go round again.
Suddenly, the aircraft clips a tree. It spins out of control, turns upside down, and smashes into the ground. The wreckage is scattered around, nearly 200 meters short of the runway. All 96 people on board die. They include not just President Lech Kaczynski, but senior members of Poland's parliament.
People in Poland died, so I don't know how will the future of our country look like.
The country declares a period of national mourning. A full crash investigation begins immediately. It's a joint Russian-Polish operation. Investigators soon find there are no signs of mechanical failure. The 20-year-old plane has recently been extensively overhauled. But that leaves a puzzle. The overhaul has included fitting the Tupolev
chain of reasons due to which something like this may happen. One of the main primary reasons is distractions in the cockpit.
1907, report radius, VK
data warns Kazakh 1907 about Saudi 763 at 14,000 feet.
Identified traffic, 12 o'clock, reciprocal.
Saudi Boeing 747
at 10 miles,
but to no avail. At 6:40 p.m., the seemingly impossible happens. Saudi 763 and Kazakh 1907 crash in mid-air over New Delhi in the world's worst mid-air collision in history. 349 lives are lost in a split second.
I was actually leaving office when my input editor, Suparna Singh, said, Vishnu, there is some news which is coming in which we'd like you to check out. News of a possible disaster, possible air crash. We drove out from Delhi, we drove into Haryana. At that stage, we didn't have any information about just where the crash had taken place, so we just proceeded in a general direction. I would say it was about 9 to 9:15 in the evening at this stage. We stopped our vehicle immediately, and the wreckage was about a kilometer away from me. And as one kept walking, I realized all around me there were clumps. What I thought was cow dung. And it wasn't too long, perhaps just a few seconds, when I realized that, look, maybe these clumps aren't manure at all, that perhaps this could be debris or perhaps it could be something else. And I immediately told Tulsi, my camera person, to switch on his camera light.
Tulsi, switch on the light.
And immediately we saw all around us, we saw dead bodies all around us. Within a few moments of actually switching on our camera light, we realized that there was no question of any survivors. The Saudi Boeing 747, the Kazakh Ilyushin 76 aircraft, there was no part of the fuselage of the aircraft which was intact. Everything had been obliterated. There were dead bodies all around. It was abundantly apparent that there was no one who would survive this.
When this incident happened, I was 7 years old. For the next couple of years, I kept thinking she'll come back.
They have gone to get my son. He's hurt, but he'll be back. He'll be back.
I could only find the passport of my eldest son. It took a second for everything to be destroyed.
There were no survivors. 349 lives are lost in a split second in the world's worst mid-air collision in history. Overnight, the small town of Cherki Dadri, where the two aircraft went down, shot from obscurity into the annals of aviation history to be synonymous with death and destruction. Forever.
I found a letter in the crash site. A girl had written to her brother, "Get me a nice dress and a pen when you get back. Come back soon." Villagers who had their dinner before the crash were the only ones who ate that night. With so many dead bodies lying in our village, who could eat? It felt like we had lost our family.
Relatives came looking for their people. They asked us to help, but how could we identify them? They were beyond recognition. Some of them couldn't speak. Their pain was evident.
The full extent of the tragedy was visible from the air. The wreckage of the two aircraft was spread over 7 kilometers. Whatever was left of Saudi 763 was either buried in the ground or lay scattered in tangled heaps of molten metal. And they too told a story. They told the investigators how the Boeing 747 disintegrated in mid-air.
747 had lost its tail plane, went out of control, spinning violently, whereby the wings separated and the 4 engines fell miles apart.
Kazakh 1907 had survived in bits and pieces. The cockpit shattered, but the burnt instrument console was still intact. Charred remains of its fuselage stood as a lone witness to a startling fact that the aircraft had not disintegrated in mid-air.
So that means that it had some flyability until very close to the ground, but it broke after impact on the ground.
Primary investigation of the wreckage suggested 2 points of impact.
The 747, I believe, was fairly straight and level, whereas the Kazakh aircraft was a slightly bank turn and offset slightly, so that the wings contacted each other first. One wing off of the Kazakh aircraft, and certainly the tail off of the 747, and that led to the crash.
And as far as the altitude of impact was concerned, the only clue was from one of the altimeters of Kazakh 1907 found in the wreckage. It was frozen at 14,895 feet.
It could be anything. There are so many evidences which are to be collected and to be compiled and studied, analyzed, and we were mostly interested in now looking for the black boxes, which are the prime evidence material for any aircraft accidents.
The 2 black boxes were found the day after. The Indian Court of Inquiry, the investigation agency, sealed the black boxes and sent them for decoding. While Kazakh 1907's black box would be decoded in Moscow, Saudi 763's black box would be decoded in the United Kingdom. But to begin with, the investigation headed not too far from Cherki Dadri to the Air Traffic Control, the ATC.
What happened is something which should not have happened has happened. In no ATC in the world would ever like a mid-air collision accident to take place. And immediately it is felt that it could be a mistake on their part. That would be the normal reaction.
The unblinking, watchful eyes that stare at the radar screen day in and day out are human. And sometimes it is human error that results in a potentially disastrous consequence.
He might just give you a wrong altitude clear too. There have been various incidences where the ATC controller has given wrong altitude clearance, due to which accidents have taken place.
When VK Datta took over his shift on November the 12th, 1996, he brought with him more than 10 years of experience and proficiency as an air traffic controller. Was it possible that he had given incorrect instructions that led to the mid-air collision? The first course of action for the investigators was to replay the ATC tapes. 8 minutes from impact, Saudi 763, after takeoff, contacts VK Datta.
Saudi 763 airborne.
Saudi 763 identified on departure. Climb flight level 100 initially, stand by for higher.
Initially flight level 100, stand by for higher.
Saudi 763.
He asks them to climb to flight level 100 or 10,000 feet. Kazakh 1907 is close to 23,000 feet. 6 minutes from impact, Kazakh 1907 at 23,000 feet contacts him.
Kazakhstan 1907. Roger, Kazakh 1907, descend to flight level 150, report reaching.
Descend in 150, call you reaching Kazakhstan 1907.
VK Datta clears descent to flight level 150 or 15,000 feet. Saudi 763 is close to 10,000 feet. 4 minutes from impact, Saudi 763, now at 10,000 feet, contacts him for further ascent.
Roger, climb flight level 140.
Further climb 140, Saudi 763.
VK Datta clears ascent to flight level 140, 14,000 feet. Kazakh 1907 is now at 15,000 feet. 1.5 minutes from impact, Saudi 763 asks VK Datta for further instructions.
Approaching 140 for higher.
Roger, maintain flight level 140, stand by for higher.
Saudi 763 will maintain 140.
He asks them to maintain 14,000 feet till further notice. Kazakh 1907 is at 15,000 feet. Two aircraft are in the same airspace on opposite headings. Saudi 763 is at 14,000 feet. Kazakh 1907 is at 15,000 feet. 1,000 feet separates them. That's safe enough, according to ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization. But shouldn't VK Dutta warn them of each other? He does. 1 minute from impact, VK Dutta warns Kazakh 1907
Saudi Boeing 747
of Saudi 763 at 14,000 feet, 8 miles in front of them. But he does not warn the Saudi aircraft.
The requirement doesn't say that, but should not take it for granted when two blips are merging that they are vertically separated. Ensure they are vertically separated by repeat messages.
But the fact remains that VK Dutta was a silent spectator to the mid-air collision.
1907 report position.
He had told the aircraft to stay at separate altitudes.
Kazakh 1907 report position.
He was assuming that they would pass each other safely. They had 1,000 feet between them.
Because he was thinking probably they were merging and going to reappear in both the sides, and waiting for giving a further descent clearance to the incoming aircraft and climb clearance to the Saudi outgoing.
It was evident that one of the aircraft, or both the aircraft, had breached its assigned flight level. By how much? And why? Three months after the accident, on a cold February morning in Moscow, the black box of Kazakh 1907 was cut open. The investigators heard the voices of the Kazakh crew for the first time.
Kazakh 1907, report radial view, this is the immediate department member. Kazakh 1907 now reached 1500. 6 miles from Delta Papa November, radio 610. Roger. Maintain flight level 150, identify traffic, fellow prop, reciprocal, Saudi, Boeing 747 at 10 miles, likely to cross to another 5 miles. Report if inside. From here. Maintain 150, Kazakh 1907.
It was clear from the tape that the air traffic controller instructed the Kazakh crew to stay at 15,000 feet. He also told them to look out for the Saudi aircraft and to report back once they had sighted it. The turning point of the investigation was when the digital flight data recorder that records altitude, speed and other technical parameters was decoded. It ruled out technical malfunction. The altitude of impact could not be calculated with accuracy. It had a huge margin of error. But the graph revealed a startling fact. Kazakh 1907 had descended below 15,000 feet.
This was a point which we all had in our mind at the time. Why? If a pilot is told to maintain certain level and if he doesn't maintain, there must be some reason for it.
You can argue that the crew made an error and just descended, but it's the puzzling part is building up why, in fact, if they made an error, why they made an error, and trying to piece that together.
The possible answer to that question lay with the sole eyewitness to the mid-air collision, Captain Timothy J. Place of the United States Air Force. He was flying into New Delhi Airport at the same time. He had seen the collision from 20,000 feet.
We descended down beneath 20,000 feet. On the arrival, it was about dusk, and we noticed out of our right-hand side a large cloud lit up with an orange glow. At first, we thought it would be lightning, but the glow stayed and became brighter in intensity, lit up the area very bright. Two fireballs seemed to appear heading in our general direction, not in our immediate vicinity, diverging away from each other. The glow intensity of the cloud became dimmer, and the two fireballs proceeded to descend
The mid-air collision happened in the clouds. Is it possible that Kazakh 1907 had descended due to bad weather? It had happened before. On December the 19th, 1973, the Delhi airport is enveloped in a thick fog. Visibility is down to 1,000 meters. A Lufthansa Boeing 707 undershoots the runway and crash lands 1,500 feet short. The Inquiry Commission finds out that the co-pilot who was flying the aircraft did not monitor the descent adequately. He was too busy trying to land the aircraft in the sudden haze and thick fog that impaired his visibility. Could the same thing have happened to Kazakh 1907? Could they have been caught in a freak weather condition? Did co-pilot Jangirov not monitor the altitude? Could he have been too busy battling bad weather?
The sorts of weather conditions that can cause an aircraft to lose a great deal of altitude are things like thunderstorm activity, where you get updrafts and downdrafts in the center of a thundercloud. That could have caused it, one of them to descend or another to climb.
But on November the 12th, 1996, the Met Department had not issued a severe weather warning. It was slightly foggy, there were scattered clouds, and that was about it. Most importantly, Kazakh 1907's cockpit voice recorder did not record any intra-cockpit conversation relating to bad weather. Neither did the digital flight data recorder record sudden changes in the aircraft's movements, nor any severe weather condition. There was no sudden descent. Kazakh 1907 had descended gradually.
I don't think that the actual weather conditions would have caused the Kazakh aircraft to descend at all.
It was like a jigsaw puzzle whose pieces just didn't fit. Kazakh 1907 had descended below its assigned 15,000 feet. But the altimeter found in the wreckage was frozen at 14,895 feet. If that's the altitude at which the collision occurred, it meant that even the Saudi aircraft had breached its assigned altitude. It had climbed above 14,000 feet. Now, all the answers lay in the black box of Saudi 763. At the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau in Farnborough in the United Kingdom, the black box of Saudi 763 was cut open. The investigators heard the voices of the crew of Saudi 763 for the first time. It was clear from the tapes that the air traffic controller had instructed the Saudi crew to climb to 14,000 feet and stay there until further notice. Saudi 763's digital flight data recorder was analyzed. The altitude of impact was 14,000 feet. The margin of error was plus or minus 120 feet. Saudi 763 did not ascend above 14,000 feet. Kazakh 1907 had descended below 15,000 feet. Why had Kazakh 1907 come down? Why was one of the altimeters in the Kazakh aircraft frozen at 14,895 feet? What could possibly be the explanation for it? What had happened in the cockpit of Kazakh 1907? It has been 5 years since the dissolution of the Soviet Union. The Commonwealth of Independent States are struggling to stabilize their economies amidst a politically volatile environment. Their airlines are no different. Kazakhstan Airlines, the state-owned airline of the country, has a bad safety record. It flies rickety aircraft, sometimes with a cockpit crew not conversant with flying outside the former Soviet Union. There have been numerous crashes and near misses, 3 in 1995 itself. But as far as Kazakh 1907 is concerned, the Ilyushin jet did not have any technical snags, and the crew was well conversant with flying outside the former Soviet Union. In fact, Captain Cherepenov had 708 hours of flight time on international routes. Co-pilot Jangirov, the pilot flying, had 207 hours. Flight engineer Chuprov had 1,178 hours. Radio operator Rep had 645, and navigator Arabayev had 581 hours of flight time on international routes. How is it possible that a crew with such experience did not level the aircraft at the assigned altitude of 15,000 feet?
As far as the IL-76 is concerned, you have to physically level out the aircraft at a particular height and thereafter press the height lock and then maintain the required speed at that particular height. It is done by the autopilot itself, but by actual physical involvement of the pilot or the co-pilot.
But in the cockpit voice recording, there are no call-outs by the co-pilot or the pilot to the flight engineer for more power to maintain speed for a particular altitude, a prerequisite for leveling an aircraft.
A plain simple explanation could be that it was a controlled flight to a lower level resulting into a collision.
A controlled flight. That means that the crew of Kazakh 1907 descended below 15,000 feet with intent. They kept descending because they never knew that their assigned altitude was 15,000 feet.
Every accident is an avoidable accident. Every accident could have been an avoidable accident, but for certain failure on the part of a human element.
It's as simple and as tragic as that. A 1 in 100 million possibility became a horrific reality due to human error. 349 lives are lost in a split second because one of the aircraft did not maintain its assigned height. How could it all have happened? Every accident, every disaster has a sequence, links in the chain of events, where one mistake leads to another, which finally leads to the catastrophe. In the world's worst mid-air collision, the sequence started 8 minutes before impact, at 6:33 p.m., when Saudi 763 takes off. VK Datta assigns them 10,000 feet. Kazakh 1907 is at about 23,000 feet. Both aircraft are in the same airspace on opposite headings. This should not have happened. This is the first mistake, the first link in the chain of events that leads to the disaster. To avoid this, the airspace above Delhi Airport should have been unidirectional. There should be 2 separate air corridors, one for the departing aircraft and the other for arriving aircraft. Then 2 aircraft on opposite headings would never share the same airspace. But this wasn't the case at Delhi Airport. There just wasn't enough room. Part of the airspace is reserved for the Indian Air Force.
Why do we always have to wait for any kind of disaster, a catastrophic disaster? Can't we do it before so many innocent lives are lost? There may be certain constraints which I can understand, but not to an extent where we have to wait for a crash, or it is something like a time bomb ticking.
The time bomb is ticking. 6 minutes to impact. Kazakh 1907 contacts VK Datta for the first time. He assigns them 15,000 feet.
Descend to flight level 150, report reaching.
Descend in 150.
The radio operator acknowledges the height, but astonishingly does not inform the 2 pilots. Worse still, the navigator also hears the assigned flight level on his headset. He is heard converting it to meters for the 2 pilots, but neither of them acknowledges the assigned height. This is the second mistake, the second link to disaster.
My personal view is that there was confusion with the pilots about what their cleared altitude was. There may have been some language difficulties.
The pilot and co-pilot's knowledge of English is limited. The radio operator is translating all commands from the Delhi Air Traffic Control for them.
Pilot flies, gets the information, directly makes a lot of difference. The reactions are spontaneous, instantaneous.
Saudi 763 approaching flight level 100 for higher. Roger, flight number 140. Further climb 140 Saudi 763.
2 minutes to impact. Kazakh 1907 is gradually descending. It's now at about 16,000 feet. Captain Cherepenov, the pilot who is not flying, is supposed to inform the cockpit crew of the estimated time and height to level out. He never does. This is the third link to the disaster.
He was the captain of the aircraft, he's the commander of the ship, so he should have known what height to be level out.
1.5 minutes to impact. Saudi 763 is told to stay at 14,000 feet till further notice. 1 minute to impact. At 6:39 p.m., the Kazakh radio operator tells VK Datta they are at 15,000 feet.
Now reached 150.
This is another extraordinary error. In reality, they are at 16,300 feet. The altimeter is on the front instrument console. The radio operator may not have seen it. This is the fourth link to the disaster. Seconds before impact, VK Datta tells Kazakh 1907 about Saudi 763 in front of them.
747 at 10 miles, set across another 5 miles. Report in sight.
Kazakh 1907 is already below 15,000 feet. By the time he completes the transmission with the radio operator of Kazakh 1907, the aircraft is at 14,500 feet. Gradually descending, it enters into a cloud layer. Saudi 763, at 14,000 feet, enters the same cloud layer. The first signs of trouble are heard in the Kazakh cockpit. The captain asks for the assigned flight level for the first time.
Flight level have you been ordered?
Kazakh 1907 is still descending, now at about 14,100 feet. Saudi 763 is at 14,000 feet. Seconds later, the two aircraft are going to crash. Even in these circumstances, with better equipment, the impending collision could have been averted. But SSR, or secondary surveillance radar, that can tell a controller the altitude of an aircraft is not installed in the Delhi Air Traffic Control. The controllers still work on archaic primary radar that can only tell them approximate headings. This means that VK Datta was not aware of Kazakh 1907's unauthorized descent.
Saudi 763.
The secondary surveillance radar had been in the offing, but mired in bureaucracy, the project lay to one side.
There are too many channels to go through, hurdles to cross, so these things take time.
The fifth link to the collision is complete. Seven seconds before impact, a tragic sequence of events unfolds in the Kazakh cockpit. The flight engineer realizes that the aircraft has descended below 15,000 feet, their assigned flight level. He probably tries to accelerate to climb, but the captain asks him to hold on and not to accelerate. The flight engineer responds by calling out, "Holding."
Holding. What I feel has happened at that point of time is that the engineer has realized that the aircraft has gone below 150. He has started opening power, anticipating the next moment I will get a call for climbing or accelerating. But the captain is not yet sure, or maybe he's made a gesture to the flight engineer that hold the power.
Kazakh 1907 holds its course. It keeps descending. The pilots of Kazakhstan Airlines 1907 don't know that their assigned altitude is 15,000 feet.
What flight level have you been ordered?
The air traffic controller can't warn them. He doesn't have secondary surveillance radar. There is a last resort. But neither of the aircraft has TCAS, traffic collision avoidance systems, installed. They do not have onboard computers that can warn them of another aircraft directly in front of them and suggest evasive action.
That is the last filter for collision avoidance, which is independent of any ground control, any ground radar. It is aircraft to aircraft. Collision avoidance systems give time which is sufficient in most cases to avoid collisions.
But the Civil Aviation Ministry never made TCAS mandatory over Indian airspace by 1996. It took India a mid-air collision to implement these systems. The sixth and the final link to the collision is complete. 2 seconds to impact. Saudi 763 is at 14,000 feet. Kazakh 1907 is at about 14,000 feet. The radio operator shouts out a warning. The captain asks for full power. If only he hadn't. Kazakh 1907 would have passed safely below Saudi 763, but it's too late. The flight engineer opens full power on all engines. Kazakh 1907 accelerates to climb to 15,000 feet. There's chaos in the cockpit. Everyone's screaming. They have just seen Saudi 763 coming towards them. At 6:40 p.m., 14,000 feet over Cherki Dadri,